everybody thinks that if they can find that thing outside them that will complete them, then everything will be okay. And that's wrong-headed thinking. You can't actually do it that way. You can only find the solutions within. The solutions don't exist out there. Now you have to be involved in the outside world, but the outside world's not going to bring your happiness to you. I don't care how rich, how famous, how admired, how many Instagram followers are, how many best-selling books you have. It does not matter. This is not going to bring you the happiness that you seek, but you always think that it will because Mother Nature is lying. She lies all the time because she only has two goals for Chase and Arthur and every single one of us, which is to survive and pass on your genes. That's all Mother Nature cares about. She doesn't care if you're happy.
Mr. Arthur Brooks is in the house. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being a guest.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Chase.
Well, our goal today is a very wide-ranging conversation, in part because you yourself are a wide-ranging individual. I find myself most deeply connected with people who touch many things, and that, of course, is a descriptor that has been used of you before. Very, very wide-ranging. I would also, however, like you, in your own words, because your background and skill set and life is so wide-ranging. How can you orient us when you describe what you do, how you do it? I'm fascinated to hear this answer. Describe yourself for our folks who might not be familiar with you or your work.
Yeah, I'm a social scientist, and I specialize in the science of happiness. I'm dedicated to lifting people up and bringing them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas, and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. So I teach at a university. I teach the science of happiness to MBA students at a business school. I travel around talking about it to academic and business audiences and public servants and military and anybody who will listen to me, basically. And it's not the first thing I've ever done. So this sort of my whole life has led up to this. Before this, I was the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C., dedicated to public policy. I did not solve the public policy problems in this country, obviously. Before that, I was teaching economics at a university, at Syracuse University. Before that, I was a French horn player. It's the whole beginning part of my career as a classical French hornist from when I was 19 until I was 31. A lot of that playing in the Barcelona Symphony. So I've done a lot of different things because there's a lot of different things that you can do when creativity is your goal, which I know you care an awful lot about.
I do. I do. It's become a passion of mine. And I think that's a reasonable place to start off because by almost, I won't say by definition, but of all of the things that we can focus on, it's not untrue that our parents, that culture, that so much of society has historically largely not been over-indexed on the value of creativity. And yet, if you look at the concept of happiness, or you look at your own life arc, for example, you started out as a French horn player and not know that you spent that much time in the Barcelona orchestra. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
the city orchestra Barcelona, yeah.
It's clearly been creativity that has clearly been very important aspect of your life. So let's start off with why creativity and what's your basis, your foundation and grounding there. And then if you care to extrapolate, like why culturally do we have a challenge with this?
So there's a lot of research on this. And as a social scientist, which I came to later, I didn't finish college till I was 30 and then, went to do my graduate work in my 30s. I didn't know any of this, but now I know, because this is what I do for a living, that culture and creativity are a well-studied area. And they load more and less heavily on different people, and they're related to happiness in all sorts of paradoxical ways. The more creative our society is, and the more beauty there is in our society, the happier the population is, but not the happier are the creators, which is a really interesting thing. I mean, newsflash, Chase, artists are not the happiest people you've ever met, right? I mean, man, I've been in a symphony orchestra. I grew up, my mother was a painter. My mother was
Wow.
She was a brilliant artist in Seattle, which is a very artistic place, and not happy. Not happy. Happiness was the big challenge around the house. I mean, there was a lot of darkness from that. So this is the great paradox. It's one of the things that we need to be happy as a civilization is art and beauty and creativity and flights of fancy. And the people who are most likely to create those things are often the people least likely to be availing themselves of the happiness benefits they bring to others.
So to me, that paradox is I'm grateful that you introduced it, because that was the next place that I was going to go and say, okay, if happiness really, or if creativity really is this important aspect of culture, why is it then? So what does the research show? And
Yeah.
maybe you might even know from personal experience. I'm actually recording this in Seattle right now, and I can report that it is classically Seattle gray out today. But weather aside, but your personal experience, the experience growing up as a child in a household like that, like why is it that we as creators often struggle with happiness, with our mental health, and yet our goal of the work in many parts is to get people to feel things and some might say be happier because of it.
So there's a lot of really interesting research on this, and you'll love this because I'm going to open up your brain a little bit and
Great.
and your audience, because your audience is creatives like people like us. We're obsessed with it. So there's a part of the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system is an ancient console of tissue that was developed between 2 and 40 million years ago that really is responsible for all of your emotions. And emotions are nothing more than information. There's no such thing as good feelings or bad feelings. Emotions basically just say there's stuff going on outside. What's your reaction supposed to be? That's how emotions work. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has the same emotions. They have the same basic categories of emotions, but they feel them in various levels of intensity. Creative people tend to feel negative emotion much more intensely than non-creative people. And here's the
Mm,
reason. There's a place in the limbic system called the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. It's a piece of tissue and that's highly activated. It's actually physically larger in ruminators. So ruminators are people who think about things, and it's very implicated in depressive uh, um, sort of obsessive thinking. I'm
mm,
so stupid. What I've done is all wrong. Nobody likes me. Did I say the wrong thing? I can't believe that sort of rumination, which is it's thinking about something negative over and over and over and over again. Now, there's a reason that we do that, which is to learn, but people maladapt to it who have an especially large ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Okay,
mm.
those are classically depressives. And actually, there's some interesting research. This is all contested because neuroscience is just in its infancy, that it's contested research nonetheless that suggests that when the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is especially active, that's when serotonin levels are really low. That's a neuromodulator that when it's really low, it's implicated in clinical depression. Okay.
Ah,
Now, when else do we see the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex really active? In the creative process and when we're falling in love. In other words, one of the parts of the creative process is iterating. It's ruminating on a creative problem. You use the same part of your brain. And so there's research that shows in the most depressive parts of composers' lives, they actually had the most creative output. And so, in other words, man, if you're going to be really creative, you're going to pay. You're going to pay because you're going to have to use the same part of your brain. And by the way, you can do your best to medicate it away, but and everybody listening to us knows that there's a cost to that too. It's like,
yeah.
oh man, I feel a little less dark, but the ideas are not coming to me. That's why. And so you got to pay the piper for all this stuff. And this is one of the really interesting areas of neuroscience research that talks about the connections between romantic, melancholic, creative people and the parts of the brain and the neurochemistry that's aiding that.
How do we fortify if drugs and alcohol and other sort of symptom relief, if you will, is probably uh has a limited ROI. Uh,
Oh yeah.
what do you recommend? What does the science say in your personal experience
Yeah.
to how do we, strengthen this, bolster this area of us? Does it mean that we have to double down on our mental health and through your lens, perhaps happiness? Like what do you feel like we ought to prescribe given the we have an audience right now? What should we prescribe to
Yeah.
those listeners?
Yeah, I know, because a lot of people listening to us are like, yeah, Brooks, I get it. I get it, man. My ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is pulsating like crazy.
and
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 what do you want me to do? And so, okay, so the problem is that the trade-off is that if you take the many of the traditional mental health routes, they're going to do things that make you perseverate less, but that has impacts on your creativity. You suffer less, but it has an impact on your creativity. So what do you want? You want one, but without the other. One of the ways that people have typically done that with, as you say, a very low ROI is drugs and alcohol, is recreational drugs and alcohol. Most notably, things that are depressants, like or sedatives, like alcohol. Alcohol is so common. People are like, "Why you artists? Why are you so old school? Why you say drinking bourbon?" Because it cuts off this connections between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. It's the most efficacious way to do that. There's nothing like alcohol. It's awesome. Drinking is awesome. It makes you feel better. The problem is twofold. Number one, the anxiety and depression will come back with a rebound the next day. And number two, it'll actually spend too much of your dopamine, another neuromodulator also implicated in creativity. And so you're not going to get any creativity till noon the next day. And the morning is your best hours. At least it is for most people. A lot of artists think that they're night people. They're not. They're just drinkers, is what it comes down to. So it's really important that I say, so that's a bad way to do it. Okay. So I still have two doors that just close, the standard door, perhaps, if you want to stay creative and you don't want to inhibit that. And the other is actually using the old school method of, a bottle of Jack Daniels. Don't do that. So what else can you do? And one of the best ways to do it is actually to meditate or is to develop spirituality in a very big way. This is one of the reasons that, I teach a lot about metacognition, which is awareness of your emotions and being able to manage your emotions. And the two best ways to do that are meditation and prayer. And that's why every artist should have a meditation practice or should get really serious about the religion of their youth. I mean, get back into it, man. I mean, if you're leaving your spirituality on the table, you're leaving the best possible avenue for you lower your negative affect intensity and stay high in creativity, which is that combination that you're looking for. That's the sweet spot.
It seems meditation has had it is, the spotlight has been on it. It is becoming more culture. We are becoming more culturally aware of it. I'll give my own. I've been practicing TM for probably, I think I'm right on the cusp of 10 years. I discovered many of the benefits that you just described. And still, I feel like when I bring it up to my close friends, that many whom have jumped on board and got great results, but just talking about it generally in public, I feel like there is a fatigue around. Okay, yeah, I know I'm supposed to meditate, and yet, is it fair to say that there really is no equal? And if yes is the answer there, then like, why are we not getting better at adopting it?
It's work. I mean, yes, it's great. TM is great. Vipassana meditation is great. Loving kindness meditation is great. Walking in nature is great. Prayer is phenomenal. I'm Catholic. I practice my Catholic faith. I practice it defensively, man. I need it. I need it. I want to keep the creativity through the roof, and I want to keep the negative affect under control. And I'm not using I'm not trying to be instrumental about it, but no joke, this really works for me, and it's working on the same mechanisms. But this is really work. It's much easier to say, well, if I take that pill, it's going to be a lot easier, right? There's got to be a hack. There's got to be I don't know, let's try MDMA, right? I don't know. Let's drop a little acid, see if that works. I read someplace that's like 10 years of TM, that kind of thing, because, everybody wants the easy way out, and it requires that you sit every day. You got to do the work is what it comes down to. And, we're just lazy. We're humans. We're lazy.
Sad, but true. And yet, given that you highlighted the research and the power there, especially as an alternative to the other two doors that you mentioned have closed, are there negative aspects to meditation? I feel like people are trying to throw rocks at this stuff now because it appears in everyone's morning routine. And again, the trendy, trite conversations that people are having around meditation and mindfulness. I feel like people are starting to throw rocks at it because there is work. You made that point clearly. Is there any downside to it that you can see in the science?
No, there's not a downside to it. Look, I mean, I know we're going to talk about this later in the conversation. I just got back from a week with His Holiness the Dalai Lama at his home in Dharamsala in the Himalayan foothills. And he reminds me that the point of meditation is not to feel better. The point of meditation is to lift up the world. And that's one of the reasons that, all these, hippie seekers go to the Dalai Lama and say, I want to become a Buddhist, man. And he's like, don't bother, because you've got the wrong motive. Your motivation is all wrong. And wrong motivation is, violating the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth of Buddhism, for Pete's sake. Like, no. But the truth of the matter is that if you have the right motivation and you do want to lift up the rest of the world, you also will feel better. You also will protect your creativity. You also will be the person that you want to be under the circumstances. So, yeah, I mean, cosmically, I could say that there's a problem with this, which is you might go into it with the wrong motivation. But I will say that the benefits are just as clear as they could be. If you're willing to do the work, you're going to get the benefit.
In the beginning, if I remember, in your most recent book with Oprah that we'll talk a little bit more about, you make there's a funny little twist. It's like everyone asks you, because you write and profess on happiness, that you must be so happy. And you describe it something like, actually, no, the people who are happy don't actually feel the need to study happiness because they got it on lockdown. So you shared that you maybe did not have that natural bent, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that. Is, the truth behind that a little bit. Is this why you started studying it? And give us a little bit of the color there would be great.
Yeah, I started studying happiness because I wanted it, not because I was so abundant in it. If I had been born a really happy person, and I had grown up in a happy person from a happy family, and by the way, mood balance, which is your moods where you naturally sit, are 50% genetic. And I come from, man, gloomy stock, artists and academics. It's pretty bad. And so if I had been on the good side of that, I would have been like, who needs to study it? It's like air. It's every place. I'm going to study air? Doesn't even make sense. You study what's not in abundance. Now, it's not like sports, or if you're a professional in it, it means you've got and you have incredible talent at it. On the contrary, this is something that you tend to study when you don't have talent in it, and you want to get better at it. And I did. I dedicated myself to it because I wanted to understand it for myself and others. And I've gotten much happier since I've been doing this, much happier by doing the work, changing my habits, and teaching others.
Did that spawn from early work as a military analyst? I mean, are these things related at all? I mean, you talked about being a musician early on in life, and you've got this stint in Barcelona that you could tell us a little bit about. Then you were an analyst for a massive corporation, and then at Syracuse. But, how did this desire, at what point did the interest become so significant that you had to make some changes?
Well, yeah, because I've done a lot of different things in my life, and I was always looking for the next thing. I was chasing. It's called chasing behavior, by the way. Chasing. And I have a restless soul, like you, like
Yeah.
a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are restless souls. And the truth is that everybody thinks that if they can find that thing outside them that will complete them, then everything will be okay. And that's wrong-headed thinking. You can't actually do it that way. You can only find the solutions within. The solutions don't exist out there. Now you have to be involved in the outside world, but the outside world's not going to bring your happiness to you. I don't care how rich, how famous, how admired, how many Instagram followers are, how many best-selling books you have. It does not matter. This is not going to bring you the happiness that you seek, but you always think that it will because Mother Nature is lying. She lies all the time because she only has two goals for Chase and Arthur and every single one of us, which is to survive and pass on your genes. That's all Mother Nature cares about. She doesn't care if you're happy. And so therefore you put two and two together. I want to be happy. I have the urge to do these things: money, power, pleasure, fame. And so therefore, if I get those goals, I will be happy. But that's a short circuit. That's a crossed cable in your reasoning, is the way that works. And then after a while, sometimes it takes, if you're smart, you can learn young. And if you're not like me, you can learn it when you're a little bit older. You have to stop doing that. And so I basically curbed my chasing behavior finally in my mid-50s and said, look, I'm a PhD social scientist. I'm going to use this for something that I really, really need. And just maybe I can crack the code a little bit. And, it's actually wasn't my idea. It was my wife's idea because she just couldn't handle it anymore. And she says, use your PhD, man, because you're driving me around the bend. And all right.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing with you. I mean, this is
I know, we're all in the same boat, brother. And so I tried, and it turns out it's absolutely true that the science is incredibly vast on this, the neuroscience. I mean, it's just the stuff that I talked about the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. I would have chased every single remedy around the bend. I would have been really frustrated because standard psychiatric techniques are actually going to be costing me too much on the creative side or whatever. and then maybe never get to the solution. But there is a solution. You just have to figure it out. And that's my job, is to actually make it easier for people to figure it out.
If you were to say the most important thing in figuring it out, whenever I'm asked questions about superlatives, the most, the biggest, I always like tense up and tend to try and reject them because it's a heavy load sometimes. But is there what is most critically important, or what is a critical element of this process?
Well, there's, you don't want to be monistic about it, they have the single one thing, but there is kind of one thing that lies behind all of the habits of the people who are happiest.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond the science, there are certain habits that correlate with higher happiness for all people. So you find there are people who pursue their faith or life philosophy. There are people who they're serious about their family relationships. They're serious about real deep friendships, not just deal friends, real friends. They're serious about making sure that their work serves other people. And the common denominator behind all these habits is love. Love of the divine, love of your family, love of your friends, love expressed to the whole world through the way that you do your work. And for creatives, that's no joke, man, because the difference between a creative who's successful and one who isn't is, we know when you don't love us. We know when you don't love us, right? I can look at a piece of art for 2 seconds. I can listen to a symphony for 2 seconds, and I know whether or not I'm loved. And so the point is love. Love is all. Love conquers everything. The devil's, of course, in the details, but at the macro meta level, happiness is love.
Why did you choose to write your most recent book with Oprah? Was there a alignment of virtues, some belief that you could reach a different or new cross section of people that needed this more than some other cross section that you were getting to with your other work? What made her an interesting co-conspirator? You've collaborated with a lot of people, to be fair, and we just talked about this Dalai Lama trip. I want to know a little bit more about that, but just anecdotally, I found that really cool and interesting, and not what I expected.
Yeah, and it wasn't what I expected either, frankly. It's not like, Oprah and I went to camp together as kids and reconnected. It's that she's a reader of my column in the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know. It's 500,000 of my closest friends every week are reading the column. I don't have the slightest idea. It's like, when you throw a piece of creative work out into the universe, you don't know who's going to consume it. And it might just be Oprah Winfrey. And sure enough, she read the column every week during lockdown, during COVID. And then I had a book that came out in 2022 called From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. That was kind of like I was whispering to the strivers, all the people who thought, oh, when I finally make it, then everything will be good. Of course, And it doesn't work that way. So I wrote that book, and she read that the first day it came out and called me and said, she had me on. She has a Super Soul podcast, which is a book podcast, very sophisticated reader. And so she had me on that. Then we did a little TV show, and we were just talking one night. She, just called my cell out of the blue. She said, if I still had my show, I'd have you on 30 times to introduce the science of happiness to a massive audience. She says, but I don't have my show. So what if I host a book and we'll throw it out into the world and to a few million people, and I'll wrap around the science with, the things that have happened in my life and the way that I would actually introduce the material on my show. And so we spent the next year writing the book together. We hammered it out at her house, and then, I was staying out on the West Coast, and we were passing chapters back and forth. And it was an incredibly edifying experience, working with Oprah Winfrey, because we have the same goal: lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love. But I do it with science, and she does it with mass media. And we blended it together in this crazy way. And it was super fun. It was absolutely fun. And, it's reached a lot of people that I wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I have it open in front of me, and just a hat tip. That's part of why I asked the question. Is because I mean, I could see why you two would connect, and I do think it is very a high level of efficacy to drive this into a population that needs it and will listen. And it's just two fascinating backgrounds. One element that is fascinating is early on in the book, you talk about if happiness not being the goal and unhappiness not being the enemy. Can you clarify?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that their secret to happiness is just getting rid of their unhappiness, and that's a hugely misguided strategy. That's basically, the hippies used to say, if it feels good, do it, which is an incredibly good way to ruin your life. If it's like nobody's ever said, hey man, my secret to happiness, meth. I mean, no. I mean, that's, the pursuing pleasure is not the secret of happiness. All that will do is it will, create all sorts of suboptimal, you know, synaptic series in your brain that will lead you to subjugation and addiction and misery. But the same problem is people who say that, my secret to happiness is trying to never feel unhappy, never feeling stressed, never feeling sad, never feeling angry, never feeling disgust. That's wrong, because you need aversive emotions, because if you didn't have them, you'd be dead. You need them to alert you to bad situations, but also you need negative experiences for growth and change as the person. I mean, especially artists, for Pete's sake. I mean, if you didn't actually experience a lot of unhappiness, you'd be a terrible artist, because you wouldn't actually have the full range of human experience in your life. And that's what you're trying to get across as a creative, is the full range of human experience in different means, and the way that you express it in different ways. So the key thing is to understand the role of unhappiness in your life. And the answer to that is that you need to manage your unhappiness, not eradicate your unhappiness. So that's a lot of what I write about. Now, there's also a huge body of science that shows that happiness and unhappiness are largely processed in different hemispheres of the brain. They're not even opposites. They're not even that related, as a matter of fact. People go through their day feeling, 16% of their day is spent almost entirely unhappy. 41% of the day is spent almost entirely pleasant, happy. It's lower amplitude. I mean, you're kind of in a positive idle. 33% of your day is spent in mixed states, which is usually kind of happy, but punctuated with something that's bothering you. I mean, that's just life. And it's coming from different parts of the brain. Different parts of the limbic system are producing these different positive and negative emotions. And your emotional balance is that full life. I mean, there's a Saint Irenaeus, this Catholic saint from the 2nd century. His most famous quote is that the glory of God is a person fully alive. He didn't say the glory of God is a happy guy. He said it's a person fully alive. And every artist watching us right now, or listening to us right now, knows that to be fully alive means suffering a lot.
It's true. The question then follows very directly. Is meditation your only prescription on moderating and or managing, I think was the word that you used, these downstream, I'll call it neutral or negative emotions, or are there other things that you would prescribe?
Yeah. So people who have maladapted or exaggerated levels of negative affect, that's just like a nerdy way of saying that your bad moods are really intense, which is a lot of people who suffer from clinical depression, generalized anxiety, or just, straight on sadness. There are lots of ways to do it. And we talked about prayer and meditation, but look, one of the most effective ways to do this is journaling. Journaling, where you're actually talking to yourself about your emotions. This is a way where you have to move the experience of your emotions from your limbic system into your prefrontal cortex. You can't do it if there's a pencil in your hand. You can't avoid it if there's a pencil in your hand. So writing down about your emotions. Now, here's an even better way, Chase. Put them into your art.
Ooh.
If you're actually channeling your negative affect into your art, you are metacognitively managing that negative affect. This is super important. It's super important. Now, I wouldn't have known this. So, I have 3 adult kids, and my little girl, she's 21, not a little girl anymore. But in high school, she wrote all this really dark fiction. I mean, dark stuff. And my wife's like, this is really a bad situation. Obviously, this is no good. I said, no. The science says that she's practicing metacognition through her art. She's actually writing down, she's channeling what's in her limbic system, writing it down, thus moving the experience into her prefrontal cortex, where she can manage her limbic system, and it's not managing her. This is one of the reasons that artists tend to be so active and so prolific when they're feeling the worst, is because they're metacognitively self-treating. Okay, now that you know that, everybody listening, use it to the greatest effect that you possibly can.
This is probably connected to why it feels good to sort of get it out of you. I will share, I am in the very final 2 weeks of my next book. It has been a very long process, one where I worked for 13 months, rejected everything. And the version that's going to press came out of me in a month. So and this process of getting it out, is this related to why is it the metacognition of our experiences and getting it into our art that's why it feels like it's coming from inside you and getting out and it feels freeing? Or is there some other science going on there?
That's right. Now, actually doing a book is different. That's a different kind of torture because, just it's the project itself. I know. And it's like, I never learn, and I always keep doing it too. But just in general, being involved in the creative process, it feels a little bit like the alien. And sometimes you feel like it's just, the thing's popping out of your chest and looking around and taking off, right? I mean, that's kind of how it feels. It's like, wow, dude. I mean, but that is the process of transcribing your negative affect, which is coming from various primordial tissues in the limbic system of your brain, and turning it into something that you can actually describe, something that your prefrontal cortex, your executive centers have turned into an actual piece of art using the technique that you've got at your disposition, such as putting notes on a page, or putting paint on a canvas, or using the shutter of your camera, or whatever it happens to be.
Let's take this, put it in our backpack, and move to an earlier book, but stay connected to that previous one. And this book is Strength to Strength: Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. And I think our average age of the listener here is like 39 or something like that. I am aware that this is a thing, especially as you move later in life, you start to look backwards, trying to connect some of the dots. And I know so many people who have been very, very successful. Many of our mutual friends that I will keep their names in confidence, but they have had glorious careers. And it's a little bit of oh shit. And as someone yourself who has experienced so much, and I would say, you've covered a lot of ground professionally. What is the secret that what would you pin as the secret in Strength to Strength for this next chapter of life, when you have had some success? And we'll speak to our audience. They're, creators, entrepreneurs, curious, culturally curious, aesthetically curious. Is there a prescription that you'd have for this next chapter?
Yeah. So I talk about this issue differently when people in business than people in the arts, but
Okay.
it winds up being the same body of science that plays into it. There's two kinds of basic intelligence that you experience over the course of your adult life. This is not just IQ. That stuff's boring. What we really want to know is how your genius manifests itself at different points in your life. In the first half of your adult life, you have something called fluid intelligence, which is your innovative capacity, your ability to focus single-mindedly, and your working memory. In other words, you're able to crack problems really quickly on your own in novel ways. That's what your brain is designed to do in your 20s and 30s. And if you're especially good at it and you're unbelievably hardworking, you're going to do something like start a company with a great business plan, or develop an entire new working area of photography, or a new style of music, or something. You're going to be a path or a complete failure, but incredibly creative, right? Because that's what that fluid intelligence is going to do. That increases. And it peaks out around age 40, late 30s, early 40s. That's where it peaks, and then it declines. And so what you find is that for the big majority of people, and I know people don't want to hear it, and so trust me, everybody listening, don't turn off the show right now, because the good news is coming, but I have to get through the bad news first. That declines for almost everybody. And you find, for example, that songwriters, they tend to be more derivative after about age 40 than they were before they were 40. You see this all the time. Artists, they tend to kind of go back to what they were really good at and what really worked. That you find that people are just a little less original, and then they get less original and less in their 50s and 60s. And so poets are a classic case of this. Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, two of the greatest, poets of the past 100 years, they both did their best work in their 20s, and they lived into the 80s, right? And it was their most inventive work, their most innovative work. It was just inventing stuff. It was just paintings with words, right? Okay, so that's fluid intelligence. And a lot of people think that's all they get, and they're very depressed when they find that it's in decline. That's why they burn out. Quite a lot of artists and a lot of business people, they burn out in their 40s because they're not making progress anymore, and innovation's getting harder than it used to be. You find like big entrepreneurs, tech startup guys, and they'll try to do another big one in their 40s or 50s, and like, I don't have a good idea, and it flushes, and they're very depressed. That's why. Okay, now some people, I mean, they're so good, but still everybody's in decline at that point. The good news, there's a second intelligence curve that comes in behind the first one. It's called crystallized intelligence. That doesn't rely on raw innovation, cognitive horsepower, working memory, or focus. It relies on pattern recognition, on acquired knowledge, storytelling. It's wisdom is what it comes down to, knowing a lot and knowing how to use it. So you find that people are their vocabulary is way richer, that they understand how a lot of things hang together. They're able to see something for the first time, and it reminds them of things that they've seen in the past that are unrelated, and they don't know why. And the reason for that is because you're able to connect all the dots. Your working memory is shitty. Okay. Your focus isn't as good, and your innovation isn't as good, but you can synthesize all kinds of things from all over the place and put together beautiful tapestries that actually come from extant ideas. You can make a quilt that is, and so this is really important. Maybe a quilt of your own stuff or a quilt of everybody else's stuff. But that's why people after 50 are great teachers, because they have rich language. They can use metaphor. The pattern recognition can help people understand things they wouldn't. I mean, I'm a much better teacher at 60 than I was at 30, much better. I mean, I can get ideas across for the first time. Students understand it the first time I say it. Why? Because I have crystallized intelligence. That's why. And so the result is that whereas when I was 35, I was writing mathematical journal articles that were so sophisticated, I can't read them today, fluid intelligence. Today, I have 500,000 readers in The Atlantic, where I write about science of happiness for a popular audience, and I weave together about 10 or 15 pieces of other people's research into a coherent narrative that makes sense to non-scientists, which is pure crystallized intelligence. And that's the goal, is to walk from one curve to the other curve.
What's the basis for doing that? Like, that's a conceptual notion, walking from a curve to a curve. What's the practical application of how one does that?
There is two curves in every profession. You just have to find them. So I'll give you some examples. If you're a lawyer, you should be the star litigator when you're 35. You should be the managing partner when you're 60. Recruiting, retaining, training talent. If you're a startup entrepreneur, you should have your big idea when you're 30. You should be a VC when you're 60. Why? What are VCs good at? They recognize talent, they cultivate talent, they look at business plans, they turn good ideas into great ideas on the basis of pattern recognition, right? If you are a researcher like me, write your whiz-bang theorem when you're 35. Write about the whole field when you're 60. This is kind of that retrospective way of thinking about things when you're older, and there's a version of this that everybody can find in their own walk of life.
I am 2/3 of the way through that. I'm focused on the Oprah book, and really, really interesting, the strength to strength stuff. Again, given that the audience who are listening and watching right now are largely approaching that time of life, highly encourage. But I do want to take us back to happiness, because this is what you write the most about. And I feel I would not be alone in saying that we are there is seemingly a dearth, and we are in seemingly uncertain, scary times. And yet, by the science, right, there are less, the world is safer now than ever before. The world is, richer now than ever before. The world is, and you can list all of these things that are true. And it doesn't feel like that. Is this just the simple fact that the information paradox, because information's moving so quickly now that we are aware that people who are less happy exist, and therefore we are projecting that, and because the media landscape is such? Or is there something else happening that is negatively affecting our happiness that is not being talked about?
There is two things at play. Number one is called a status quo bias, where we think that right now is more of everything than ever. That's number one. And number two, we have a negativity bias, which is to say that we pay attention to the negative as opposed to the positive, because we're evolved to do that. We're evolved to see threats more than opportunities, because opportunities are nice to have. Threats, if you don't pay attention to them, you're going to be a tiger's dinner. So that you put those two things together, and you go all throughout human history, it's always the worst time. It's always the worst time. And the generation behind us, they're always lazy, right? And we're always doomed, and we're always about to run out of all our natural resources. And the people in power are always corrupt. Turns out the people in power are less corrupt than they've ever been. It turns out that, in many ways they're not, everything's perfect, but the world is better, as you suggest, more prosperous, less, greater literacy. There's more freedom around the world. There are fewer dictatorial regimes. I mean, it's better. Life is better. We've got a more enlightened society than we did in the past. We can't pay attention to that because of those two biases. Plus, we're always manipulated by dark triad leaders, which is leaders that are malignant narcissists who are also Machiavellian. They're willing to hurt people for power, and they feel no remorse, which is about 7% of the population. It's not you. It's not me. I hope it's not our listeners, but it's a lot of people who want to be elected to political office or want to have a fantastic position in media. They are dark triads, and they're going to actually use us. So when you're afraid or when you hate, you become somebody's product. 9 times out of 10, it's not rational. You become somebody else's product. You need to look at these things rationally. You need to pay attention to what really matters for you. You can't be conscripted into some malignant narcissist culture war. You have to make sure, you have to recognize that when somebody's telling you that, yeah, forget about actual religion or meditation. No. Get really involved in my political cause, and then you'll find meaning. You're the product, man. Don't do it.
That is a beautiful bridge, if you will, to your recent journey to be with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we have some friends of the show, friends of mine, Rain, Rich Roll, a couple examples. They've both been on the show many times. I've been on theirs. And I found out you're all going together. So I missed out on the trip of a lifetime. And it is at its core very relevant to this happiness piece, to the cultural phenomenon that I think so many of us are experiencing that I'm asking you about right now. What was talk about the purpose, talk about some takeaways through this lens of how do we do it better in a world where we don't quite feel the better feeling?
So I've known the Dalai Lama for 11 years. We met in 2013. And the reason was I was running this think tank in Washington, D.C., dedicated to public policy, better public policy, and had a real orientation toward lifting people up to the margins of society using the tools of free enterprise, like pushing capitalism to the outside, not to the rich guys, but to the poor guys, opportunity, yeah, rah, rah, rah. And so what I wanted to have was a big conversation about the ethics of this, right? Because I want all different points of view. I mean, I believe in free speech and free expression. I'm like a free speech absolutist, man, which, is super fun on a college campus, as you can imagine. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But at Harvard is not the happiest place in the universe because we haven't had the freedom of speech in a really long time. But I wanted to have a big conversation because look, Chase, I might be wrong, and when I'm talking about capitalism, rah, 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 I want somebody who's going to say, no, no, no. You're not getting it right. So I went in search of the smartest, most deeply I don't want just political activists. I don't want that nonsense. I'm sick of it. Right, left, it's all stupid. So I wanted to go find people who have a deep spiritual understanding and who I want to share ideas. So I'm thinking, I wonder if the Dalai Lama would take a meeting. So I got in touch with the people who, work with the Dalai Lama, and he lives in Dharamsala, which is in the Himalayan foothills in northern India, where the Tibetan community in exile lives. And he's been in the same monastery for the past 60 years. And I, went up there. It was arduous getting up there 11 years ago. And he took the meeting after an hour and a half. I said, can we have this big conversation about the spiritual dimensions of economic processes in Washington, D.C.? And he said, yes. And we started this beautiful friendship that we've continued. And so I've interviewed him in public 11 times. I've written with him, in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and, working on these big projects together. And so this year I wanted to talk to him about the issue of transcendence. Your Holiness, how do I transcend me? Get me away from me, please. And that means get me toward you and get me toward heaven or whatever. Get me toward the divine, get me above myself. I want to understand. And he really wanted to talk about that too. So I went and I thought, who should go? And so I took a bunch of, I took my lab. I have a lab at Harvard where we do research on this, on transcendence and the religious experiences and happiness and pretty much anything we want, which is awesome. And we took some people that I really love. Rainn Wilson is just somebody I really care an awful lot about. He's a very deep guy. For those of you who don't know, that he would play Dwight Schrute on The Office, but
yes,
trust me, this guy runs miles deep.
Oh, his Soul Boom, all that stuff has been so awesome to see him.
Phenomenal. We grew up 5 miles apart in Seattle, actually.
I'm in Seattle right now. Where do you mind saying where? I mean, I know he was in Lake Forest Park.
On the north side of Queen Anne.
All right.
And his grandparents lived in Ballard, which is right across the ship's canal.
I'm in Wallingford overlooking Gasworks Park right now as we speak. So
right. Gasworks Park, which is a toxic waste dump play on his kids.
They fixed it apparently.
Yeah, I'm sure they remediated. All I can say is there's something wrong. I can't stop doing this with my eye.
Yeah, this side of my face is very tan. I don't know why. This is where I sit, and it's the radiation, right?
So it's like, I don't know. Rich Roll, who's
an
incredible podcaster and an incredible person. And we talk about 35 other people too, kind of that ilk of people who could really do it. And we had this very deep conversation with His Holiness over a few days and a few other things too. I actually visited a monk who's been a hermit in isolation for 25 years because I want to write about the benefits of going away by yourself for a long time. But I needed to go see a hermit. So I climbed up the mountain. I literally went to a hut on the top of a mountain and visited a hermit. And, it was a big experience. The experience was Chase, a little bigger than I wanted, frankly, because on the way back from Dharamsala to Delhi, Dharamsala is the village where they were. It was a commercial prop plane on an Indian airline called SpiceJet. I kid you not. And their motto is red, hot, and spicy. Which is I'm looking for in dinner, but I'm not. It's not what I'm looking for in airline
or a bank. I don't. Airlines and banks don't name your bank that, right? Or airline.
So SpiceJet lost an engine on the way back, and we had to divert to Amritsar, which is a city on the Pakistani border. And suffice it to say, it was a very, very tense 15 minutes at the end of a week of inner peace with His Holiness.
Wow. Did you feel like your question was answered by His Holiness?
Yes. I mean, it always is, but here's the interesting thing, Chase. So every time I go to His Holiness, he doesn't tell you what you think you want to know. He tells you what he knows you need to hear. That's what he does. I mean, I could go in and I could ask him about Yankees or Red Sox, Your Holiness, and he would talk about whatever he wants because he would look into my soul. He believes we've known each other for lifetimes, he and I. Wow. And he knows me. I mean, it's like I see him and he sees me and it's like he says, my old friend. I haven't seen him in a year. He say, my old friend. And he sees me, but he means really my old friend.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is how the Dalai Lama is. And anybody who's listening to us who has had the privilege of meeting him knows exactly what I'm talking about. He's a singular individual who has truly changed the world through the power of warm-heartedness and love. He's had his country taken away through brutal military force by the Red Chinese army. I mean, the biggest army in the world, just basically get out. And he has prayed for the Chinese leaders every day for 60 years, going from a complete nobody in world terms to being the most respected religious leader in the world by practicing what he preaches, which is warm-heartedness and love. And that's basically what he talked about. I said, Your Holiness, what's the secret to transcending myself? And he says, concentrate on love. And then we talked about how to do that. Then I said, what's the secret of all religions? And he said, all you need to understand is that love is at the center of everything, that all religions are based on the concept of true love. And we talked about that the second day. And so, he answered my question. It wasn't the question I went in with, but it sure was the question I needed to answer, which is that Arthur Brooks needs more love in his life.
Do you feel like you're going to get that through writing more books, through your art, are you recasting your life in a different image and or direction based on the feedback that you got?
I don't know. It's only been a couple of days and I'm still pretty jet lagged.
I'm looking for, come on, Arthur, I'm looking for knowledge here.
Yes. And I'm looking forward to debriefing with Rainn and Rich and the other people on the trip on how we're all going to make a commitment to live love in our lives in a more tangible way. It's interesting because we had this conversation and we're all in public jobs, right? We're all, you're in a public facing job. I'm in a public facing job. And we're in a very tough time and a tough time because, for example, we're in election year. And it's very easy for all of us who have a public facing role to, get pissed and write something imprudent on social media or say something or whatever. And my job is to express more love across different, bonds. It's really what it comes down to is, what am I going to do to have more love for people different than Arthur? That's really what it comes down to. And so what my goal is with my writing and with my work is, I'm going to go find more people that I disagree with, and I'm going to love them more this year. That's my act of rebellion against the hatred and contempt in our country this election year. Who knows? Maybe on this Chase Jarvis podcast that we could start a rebellion. Let's start a movement.
Bring it. Bring it. It needs to be, in colloquial terms, broughton. It really, we get a broughton it. My wife is booed-ish. She studied with Ram Dass, Roshi Joan Halifax, so many of the spiritual leaders. And she has been in this for a long time. And it is, we find these people in our lives for a good reason. She's a great match for me. I for her. This morning, I took particular notice in advance of our conversation, no doubt, that my wife has a little sticky note and it says, "I choose unconditional love." And it stuck with me today in a different way because I'm coming into our conversation and I've been preparing for it for a while. What do you feel as a social scientist about the universe, about things like intuition, about messages, about signals, spirituality in that realm rather than the practical application of it?
So I'm a social scientist based on data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a Christian, and I'm committed to my faith. And those are not in conflict. They're not. And the reason they're not in conflict is because, imagine that I said, Chase, I'm an art historian, right? I specialize in Picasso. And I know everything about Picasso's paintings, but I don't believe in the artist. I don't believe in Picasso, right? You'd be like, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to believe in God. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, there's no tension between the art and the artist, between the creator and the creation. But you're not going to find evidence of the creator in the creation, which means that you need to spend special attention and time to try to reach that special knowledge outside of the purview of empirical regularity. In plain English, I'm not going to find social science data that give me evidence of God. On the contrary, I'm going to find fruits of what I believe are God, but I need to actually have a leap of faith and live in that mystery and do that in a different way. And so the result is that I have a very rich life as a scientist, and I have a very deep life as a religious person. And the iron sharpens the iron on this, which is really, really important. And I have to do both. I mean, my protocols, I'm going to sound like Huberman now. I mean, the protocols are, I get up every morning in the Brahma Muhurta. I mean, I've studied a lot of comparative religion, and I've been hugely enriched by my Southern Indian teachers and the Dalai Lama and the people that I've studied with of the Eastern religions, which I don't follow, but I've learned from so much and have enriched my faith so deeply. I get up in the Brahma Muhurta, which is a Sanskrit word for the creator's time, an hour and a half before sunrise. And then I work out rigorously. And then I get dressed and I go to mass every day. I go to mass every morning at 6:45 in the morning until 7:15. And then I apply psychostimulants liberally to my prefrontal cortex. I drink a lot of coffee. I'm not smoking meth. I drink a lot of coffee. And that's when I actually have my most creative period, because I've optimized my neurochemistry, but also I recognize that I have treated my body and soul appropriately for the day that's ahead. And I've honored the experience that I'm going to get walking this world. What a privilege.
Yeah.
I mean, what a privilege it is. Don't waste it by, lying in the bed and goofing off and no, not a second. But to do that, you have to wrap around body and soul, technique, spirit, science, bring it, man, and understand that it all has its place.
What do you feel like is the biggest gap that we culturally need to cover in order to take the largest step, the largest untaken step? We have to take a step. What is the gap? Like, what do we need to focus on as a culture? What's a message that you feel like is or understood, that if we could leave our listeners today with something I tend to couch all this stuff in creativity. You're creating your life. The experience that you just shared, like that is an active process. You made a decision. You're going to create this. You made time, space, energy, devotion, all of the things to create that for yourself. And that has the benefit of being the most, efficient or effective version of you. Is it our job individually to do that, or is there something much larger, or is it a simultaneous game? Please help me understand it.
Each one of us has an individual responsibility to do that, because each one of us has to build the life that we want. Each one of us has to see our own life as the ultimate work of art. I mean, you are startup you're the founder, you're the enterprise founder, you're the guy, but more importantly, for the metaphors that you and I are most comfortable with, you're painting your own canvas, man. You're writing your own score. You are the book, and we get stuck in like the past. But if you're going to write a book starts in the middle of a character's life with some sort of a backstory, but all of the book goes forward from there. And the writer gets to do it, and you're the writer. Once upon a time, there was a dude named Chase Jarvis, and he had a huge adventure. What's about to happen? You're the writer. That's what we get to do. The problem that we have in our society is that we've been systematically disempowered by distraction. That's what it's come down to. We are constantly distracted by stupid things, by things that just suck up our dopamine, that just command our brain chemistry, that block the activity of our prefrontal cortex, that captivate our limbic system, that will just lock in our ventrolateral prefrontal cortex so that we're ruminating on things that we absolutely should not. And that's terrible. Now, there are people who are doing that because that's a ton of dough. Social media companies are not, they're not nonprofits, man. I mean, they're making a lot of money, and the way that they're doing it is by distracting you away from the business of you, is what it comes down to. And so what we need to do is to take back our lives. Now, okay, all right, go to Congress and say, regulate social media. Certainly for young people, I get it. I ran a public policy think tank. I can dig it, totally. But really what it comes down to is that every 39-year-old listening to the Chase Jarvis podcast, it's do not waste another minute on the artwork of your life. No more scrolling, no more binging some stupid television show you don't like, because all you're doing is there's another empty canvas you're never going to get to, is what it comes down to. And as far as I'm concerned, distraction is the bubonic plague of our time.
My next book is called Never Play It Safe, and it is about exactly what you just shared. And so I'm going to beg, plead, borrow, steal a few more moments of your time at another date. But I can't thank you enough for giving us something that we all have a role, and people are looking. So people in this community, people in other communities, we are looking left and right, top down, for something to do to get us out of the way that we are feeling and the lack of, again, I keep using the word, like it's like effectiveness or something. There's some gap between where we are and where we need to be, and we're all looking for it. And that was a very profound and lovely laser beam that you just shot there. So, thank you.
Can't wait to read your next. It's you're not in the same wavelength. Can't wait to read the new book.
I need to do the proper justice and direct people to the books again. From strength to strength, finding success, happiness, and deep purpose in the second half of life. It was just that it's been an absolute treat that I really I didn't expect. I want to pull up. So I get the subhead of the new one, because I have not memorized that one. It's Build the Life You Want: The Art and Science of Getting Happier. Absolutely, I'm telling you, absolutely masterwork. Grateful for our time today. I've directed our listeners to those two books, which they would both be on my top 10 books of the year that I've read. Where else would you steer us? You've got a lot, as we've talked about it. We never got to the symphony in Spain, but you could probably point us to a lot of other places. But where would you, if you were given a 30-second platform here to tell us where else to go?
The place where I write every week, the kind of what's newest on my mind, is my column in the Atlantic, How to Build a Life. That comes out every Thursday morning in the Atlantic. So you can get your 1,200 words, your fix on the science of happiness. And more or less the way that you and I are talking right here is what it comes down to. A different topic every week that solves a different particular problem. And I have a website called arthurbrooks.com. It's got surveys that you can take for free and all kinds of cool resources. And the key thing is, if you do it, download the resources and share them with other people. That's all I ask, is that you become the happiness teacher.
Beautiful. Very, very grateful for your time. And I would like to, again, say thanks so much for listening, to everyone, for your time. Your time is valuable. I hope today's episode has been valuable. And of course, feel free to share and direct people to Arthur's work. And I will take a moment and say, from Arthur and myself, we hope you have an amazing day, and we bid you out there in the world adieu. Thanks again, Arthur. I appreciate your time very, very much.